It's about 40,000 years ago, and you are sitting by a fire somewhere in East Africa, and the person across from you is old. Not old the way we picture old today. No walker, no reading glasses, no medication schedule taped to a fridge that doesn't exist yet. This person still walks for miles without stopping to catch their breath. Their joints still work. Their mind is sharp enough that the entire tribe defers to them when a decision needs to be made. And here's the strange part. By modern standards, this person shouldn't even exist. You've probably heard the line 100 times. Cavemen died at 30. Life was nasty, brutish, and short. Ancient humans were basically walking corpses by the time they hit their 30s. And thank God for modern medicine, because otherwise, we'd all be dead by now too. That statement is repeated so often that most people accept it as settled fact. And here's the thing. It's not really true. Or rather, it's true in a way that completely misses the point, and once you understand why it's misleading, you stumble into one of the strangest and most uncomfortable questions in all of human biology. Did some ancient humans actually age slower than we do? Let's start by taking apart the myth, because the myth is doing a lot of heavy lifting it doesn't deserve. When people say ancient life expectancy was 30, they are technically quoting a real number, but that number is an average, and averages lie constantly when the data behind them is lumpy. Ancient infant and childhood mortality was brutal, genuinely brutal. A huge percentage of children died before the age of 5, from infection, from accidents, from things a modern antibiotic would fix in a week. When you average a population where half the babies die at 2 and the other half live to 70, you get an average lifespan of somewhere around 30. That's not because everyone died at 30. That's because the math of averaging catastrophic infant mortality against a full adult lifespan produces a number that describes nobody's actual life. Anthropologists have a much better tool for this, and it's called life expectancy at age 15. In other words, if you already survived childhood, if you made it past all the diseases and accidents and predators that killed children at horrifying rates, how long did you then live? And the answer, across hunter-gatherer populations studied by modern anthropologists, is startling. 60, 65, sometimes 70. Grandparents were not a rare miracle in ancient societies. They were a normal, expected, structurally important part of the tribe. There's actually a whole body of evolutionary theory built around this called the grandmother hypothesis. The idea that humans evolved unusually long post-reproductive lifespans specifically because older individuals, especially grandmothers, dramatically increased the survival odds of their grandchildren by helping gather food, share knowledge, and free up younger mothers to have more children sooner. Evolution doesn't waste energy keeping useless individuals alive for decades. If elderly humans were sticking around into their 60s and 70s, there was probably a reason. And that reason shaped the entire trajectory of the species. And this isn't just a theoretical construct built from one lucky data set. The Hadza of Tanzania, one of the last populations on Earth still living a substantially foraging lifestyle, show a similar pattern. Anthropologists tracking Hadza demography for decades have found that individuals who survive past adolescence routinely live into their 60s and 70s. Hunting, walking, and working well past the age where a modern office worker would be filing for early retirement out of sheer physical necessity. The Juhoansi of the Kalahari, another extensively studied foraging population, show the same curve. Survive childhood, and a long adult life becomes the expectation, not the exception. This pattern shows up again and again across wildly different continents, climates, and cultures. And that repetition is itself a clue. If long post-childhood lifespans were some freak accident of one specific group's genetics or one specific region's luck, you'd expect to see it once, as an outlier. Instead, you see it as a pattern, which suggests something deeper and more universal about how the human body, left to operate under something resembling its original conditions, actually behaves. So the first myth to die here is simple. Ancient humans weren't uniformly dropping dead at 30. Many of them, if they cleared the brutal gauntlet of childhood, lived long lives by any standard, ancient or modern. But that's only half the story, and it's the boring half. Here's the part that gets genuinely strange. It's not just that some ancient humans lived a long time. It's that the way their bodies aged during that time appears, based on a growing body of research, to have been fundamentally different from the way ours age now. And to understand why, we need to talk about what aging actually is. Because most people have the wrong picture in their head. Aging is not one single process. It's not a clock ticking down inside you at a fixed rate that nothing can touch. Aging is better understood as an accumulation of biological damage, inflammation, and cellular wear that compounds over time. And crucially, the rate at which that damage accumulates is not fixed. It responds, sometimes dramatically, to the environment a body is living in. This is where things get uncomfortable, because it means aging, or at least a significant portion of it, is not simply something that happens to you. It's something your environment is doing to you, continuously, in ways most of us never think about. In the last 2 decades, researchers studying populations that still live something close to a pre-industrial lifestyle have found some genuinely startling results. The most famous example is the Tsimane, an indigenous population in the Bolivian Amazon who live as forager horticulturalists, meaning they farm a little, hunt a little, and fish a little. Roughly the closest living approximation we have to how most humans lived for the vast majority of our history. Researchers who studied thousands of Tsimane adults found something that should not be possible according to the standard modern narrative about aging and heart disease. Almost none of them had significant coronary artery disease. Not a slightly lower rate. Almost none. 80-year-old Tsimane individuals were showing arterial health that would be considered exceptional for someone decades younger in an industrialized country. Researchers looked at their cholesterol, their blood pressure, their inflammation markers, and found levels that modern cardiologists would consider almost suspiciously good. This wasn't a fluke of genetics either, because when Tsimane individuals move into more urbanized, westernized environments and adopt more processed diets and more sedentary routines, their markers start shifting in the same unhealthy direction seen everywhere else in the industrialized world. Which tells you something enormous. This wasn't about ancient Dina being magically superior. It was about the environment the body was operating inside. So what exactly is different about that environment? This is where the story gets less mystical and a lot more mechanical, and honestly a lot more useful. Because it means the difference isn't some lost secret. It's a set of specific, identifiable inputs that modern life has quietly stripped away or replaced. Let's go through them one at a time, because each one on its own sounds small, and together they add up to something enormous. First, movement. Modern humans think of exercise as a scheduled event. Something you do for 45 minutes at a gym and then stop doing for the remaining 23 hours of the day. Ancient humans did not have workouts. They had lives that simply required constant low-level physical effort. Walking for miles to forage, carrying water, building shelter, chasing, tracking, climbing. There was no such thing as sitting for 8 hours in a chair and then trying to make up for it with a jog. The body evolved for continuous moderate activity punctuated by occasional bursts of intensity, not for long stretches of total stillness followed by concentrated exercise. And it turns out chronic stillness, the thing most modern humans do for the majority of their waking hours, is deeply corrosive at a cellular level. It slows circulation, worsens insulin sensitivity, and quietly accelerates the exact inflammatory processes associated with age-related disease. Second, food, and this one is almost embarrassingly obvious once you say it out loud. Ancient diets, whatever their specific regional composition, were built entirely from whole, unprocessed foods. Because processed food did not exist. There were no substances engineered in a lab to be maximally addictive, no ingredients designed to spike your blood sugar as violently as possible, while bypassing the natural signals that tell your brain you're full. Modern humans are, for the first time in the history of the species, consuming a diet substantially made up of ultra-processed food, and the metabolic chaos this creates. The constant blood sugar spikes and crashes, the chronic low-grade inflammation, the disruption of gut bacteria that evolved over millions of years to process something completely different, appears to be one of the single largest accelerants of biological aging that modern life has introduced. Researchers now use a term for this kind of slow, sustained diet and lifestyle-driven inflammation. They call it inflammaging, a slow chronic fire smoldering under the surface for decades, and it's now considered one of the central drivers behind heart disease, diabetes, and even cognitive decline. Third, and this one surprises people every time, light and sleep. Ancient humans lived by a punishingly consistent rhythm dictated by the sun, because there was simply nothing else available to light the darkness except fire, and fire is a poor substitute for the sun in terms of the specific wavelengths that regulate your internal clock. When the sun went down, darkness actually meant darkness. Your body's internal clock, the one that governs hormone release, cellular repair, and immune function, evolved inside that rhythm and depends on it to function correctly. Modern humans are bathed in artificial light deep into the night, staring at screens that specifically emit the wavelengths most disruptive to melatonin production, and then waking up to alarm clocks that override the body's natural signals entirely. This isn't a minor inconvenience. Circadian disruption has been linked in study after study to accelerated cellular aging, impaired immune function, and a measurably higher risk of the exact chronic diseases we associate with getting old. Fourth, and this is the one almost nobody talks about, chronic psychological stress. Ancient humans absolutely experienced stress, and often it was the kind of stress that could genuinely kill you in the next 5 minutes, a predator, a rival group, a bad fall. But here's the key distinction. That stress was almost always acute. It spiked hard, and then, once the danger passed, it resolved, because the threat was gone. Modern stress rarely resolves. It's not a lion in the grass. It's a low, constant hum of financial anxiety, social comparison, deadline pressure, and notifications. A kind of stress that never fully switches off because the source of it, unlike a lion, doesn't ever actually leave. Chronically elevated cortisol, the hormone your body produces under sustained stress, has been directly linked to faster cellular aging, measurable through something called telomere shortening, the gradual fraying of the protective caps on the ends of your chromosomes that happens every time a cell divides. Multiple studies have found that people under chronic psychological stress show shorter telomeres, essentially older cells, than their actual chronological age would predict. Your body, in a very real biological sense, can be aging faster than your birthday count suggests, purely because of the kind of stress modern life specializes in producing. Fifth, community. And this is the strangest one. The one that sounds soft and sentimental until you look at the data behind it. Ancient humans lived embedded in dense, constant social contact. You were never really alone. Your survival depended on a tightly interlaced group of people who knew you, relied on you, and would notice immediately if something was wrong. Modern life, for enormous numbers of people, is defined by the opposite. Isolation, thin social ties, entire days that pass with minimal, meaningful human contact. And loneliness, it turns out, is not just an emotional state. It is a measurable biological stressor. Researchers have found that chronic loneliness is associated with elevated inflammation, weakened immune response, and a mortality risk comparable to smoking a significant number of cigarettes a day. The human body, shaped by hundreds of thousands of years of constant tribal proximity, appears to interpret prolonged isolation as a kind of danger signal. And it responds the way it responds to danger, by activating stress pathways that, over years, wear the body down. So when you put all of this together, the constant movement, the whole food diet without engineered hyperpalatable junk, the strict light and darkness cycle, the acute rather than chronic stress, and the dense, unbroken social contact. You start to see that ancient humans weren't biologically superior. They weren't running some secret genetic software that made them immune to aging. They were simply living inside an environment that happened to align almost perfectly with the conditions their bodies had spent millions of years evolving to expect. Modern humans are running that exact same ancient hardware, the same genome, the same cellular machinery inside an environment that has changed almost beyond recognition in the blink of an evolutionary eye. Agriculture is roughly 10,000 years old. Industrialization is a few hundred years old. The smartphone is not even 20 years old. Evolution operates on a timescale of tens of thousands of years at minimum. Your body simply hasn't had time to update its expectations, and scientists have a name for the resulting mismatch. They call it evolutionary mismatch theory, the idea that a huge portion of modern chronic disease isn't really disease in the traditional sense at all. It's the predictable result of an ancient body operating inside an environment it was never designed for. Like trying to run software from the Stone Age on hardware built for the Information Age and being surprised when things start to glitch. Now here's a twist that makes this whole picture more complicated and more honest, because it would be dishonest to pretend modern life is only making things worse. Modern medicine has done things ancient humans could never have dreamed of. Vaccines, antibiotics, surgery, clean water, sanitation. These innovations crushed childhood mortality and eliminated entire categories of death that used to define human life. A woman giving birth today faces a fraction of the risk her ancestors faced. A child with a bacterial infection today survives a disease that used to be a near automatic death sentence. So the picture is not simply ancient good, modern bad. It's something stranger and more specific. Modern civilization solved the problems that used to kill people early, and in the process of solving them, quietly introduced a new, slower set of problems that erode people late. We traded acute catastrophic risk for chronic accumulated damage. And because the second kind of damage takes decades to show up, most of us never connect it back to the daily choices that are actually causing it. And here's where the story takes an interesting turn, because this isn't actually a depressing conclusion. It's almost the opposite. If aging were simply a fixed genetic countdown, there would be nothing to do about it except wait. But if a meaningful portion of what we call aging is actually the accumulated result of environmental mismatch, that means it responds to intervention. It means that Samani weren't born with a secret. They were living inside a set of conditions that anyone, in theory, could partially recreate. Researchers studying biological age today use tools like epigenetic clocks, tests that measure chemical changes to your DNA that accumulate with age and stress, essentially giving you a readout of how old your cells actually behave rather than how many birthdays you've had. And what these studies keep finding again and again is that the people whose biological age lags meaningfully behind their chronological age tend to share a strikingly familiar list of habits. Consistent movement throughout the day rather than concentrated bursts of exercise followed by stillness. Diets built overwhelmingly from whole foods. Strong, consistent social bonds, regular exposure to natural light and genuine darkness at night. And critically, some kind of buffer against chronic, unresolved stress. None of this is exotic. None of it requires supplements shipped from overseas or biohacking routines involving expensive machines. It requires, almost mockingly, roughly the same conditions a hunter-gatherer experienced by simply existing inside their normal daily life. Which brings us to the uncomfortable irony sitting at the center of this entire subject. We built an extraordinary civilization specifically to make life easier, safer, and more comfortable, and in the process, we accidentally engineered an environment that appears to be quietly aging us faster, in certain specific and measurable ways than the harsh, dangerous, unpredictable world our ancestors survived in. The old man by the fire 40,000 years ago faced threats we can barely imagine. Starvation, predators, violence, disease with no real treatment. His life was, in almost every practical sense, harder than ours. But the specific biological rhythm his body operated inside, the light, the food, the movement, the acute rather than chronic stress, the constant human closeness, happened to be almost exactly the rhythm his cells were built for. We removed nearly all of his dangers and accidentally removed the rhythm along with them. So no, ancient humans were not immortal. They were not secretly immune to aging, and plenty of them died young for reasons modern medicine has genuinely and wonderfully solved. But for those who survived, there is a real growing body of evidence suggesting their bodies aged along a slower, gentler curve than ours typically do now. Not because of anything magical in their blood, but because of the ordinary, unremarkable conditions of their everyday lives. And the strange, almost funny part is that we didn't lose access to those conditions because they became impossible. We lost them because we built a world so comfortable that walking for food, seeing genuine darkness at night, and sitting around a fire with people who actually know you became optional. So the next time you're lying awake at 2 a.m, phone light washing over your face, eating something out of a bag with a shelf life longer than most ancient humans' childhoods, sitting in the exact same chair you've been sitting in for 9 hours, just remember. Somewhere on the other side of 40,000 years, an old man by a fire is still walking for miles tomorrow, still surrounded by people who would notice if he vanished, still falling asleep the moment it gets dark, and waking the moment it gets light. And his body, in ways we are only now beginning to understand, might be quietly winning a race none of us realized we had entered. One lap at a time, without a stopwatch, without a gym membership, without ever once calling it a workout.